Next up, we have Humanist Doing Good's own Jesse Bond. Jesse's going to be giving us a presentation on good for goodness sakes and the importance of volunteerism.
Is this okay, everyone? Is this loud enough? All right. So as Natasha just said, I'm Jesse, and our group is called Humanist Doing Good. We're based in Junction here, and we have three main pillars that we focus upon. The first is volunteering to do good deeds for the sake of good. The second is creating a sense of fellowship and community amongst the non-religious. And the third is promoting secular education and activism, like this conference. Obviously, it's a pretty big educational event. Today we're going to focus primarily on our first pillar and upon doing good for the sake of good. We're also going to focus on the importance of volunteerism and humanitarianism as it relates to the secular movement. So I'm going to begin with, doing good for the sake of good does not mean that there are no benefits to doing it. Doing good for the sake of good means that we act with good intentions and we're seeking positive results. It also doesn't mean that you have to take yourself or your organization's interests out of the equation. What it does mean is that you should be acting in what people perceive as a positive manner while not having the intention to actually do something else, such as lure a person into a faith or something, which often happens. It also, doing good for the sake of good does not mean that we can't evaluate the results from what we're doing. Often there's kind of this perception that, oh, you have to have no self-interest whatsoever when you're doing good for the sake of good, but you can still evaluate the results and include your own organization or yourself in the final balance to figure out, okay, am I doing good? In the secular context, it also has a lot to do with doing a good deed without giving any kind of thought or concern for rewards or punishment in the afterlife. That really just doesn't factor into the equation for us. Before we go any further, I want to kind of take an honest look at where we begin. As a non-religious or secular person, there are plenty of people who, by default, think you're antagonistic, that you are evil, obnoxious, you are selfish, and wrong. We've had plenty of that sort of perception happen as we organize this event and stuff, as you can imagine. So I want to start, let's be honest. Lots of people out there think this is who we are, right? And that, obviously this is before they've even met you. So now let's look at how many secular groups engage with others. Unfortunately, groups often partake in a lot of mockery, like these stickers here that I've shown, belittling and name-calling. It's exactly what many of us hate when it happens to us. And also, unfortunately, many secular groups simply don't engage others much at all. They kind of lock themselves up in ivory towers and kind of end up preaching to the choir where they're just kind of all talking to each other and not really much forward progress is being made beyond their own group. Often they react to perceived threats and that never actually affect their lives, or they are happy to jump into debates. They'll write letters to the editor and stuff. They may initiate lawsuits. Usually, these people that are doing this are usually on the right side of the law, and they usually are standing on sound intellectual footing. But does that usually make people like you? And that's kind of, if we're going to be working on a perception, we need to take considerate of this. In fact, I'd say that most of the time when we act like this, we end up reinforcing the beliefs of the people that we're having the arguments with. It often provokes them to kind of engage in a double-down defense of their beliefs, and they sink their heels in, and even if they know they're wrong, they just don't want to admit it, and they kind of just buckle in. So, what I wanted to say is that we're usually not doing much to win the hearts and minds of many people, and to make them quit viewing us as antagonistic. So I'm going to ask, might our time be better spent volunteering to help people who have negative or borderline opinions of us by possibly doing something that might change their mind about us in a positive way? Or what if we instead volunteer to help others to chip away at negative stereotypes? If we're out being a benefit to our community, being nice, talking directly to people instead of at them, then perhaps we'll make some progress. And doesn't carrying out a positive action seem to have a much better chance to elicit a positive response than people doing something negatively and then expecting a positive response to somehow, fall out of their sky to them. So, many secular groups seem to heavily focus upon changing minds, but usually not hearts. And often they'll carry on these kind of pointless arguments with people who are deaf to them. They just are picking the wrong people to have the argument with because these people don't want to engage them, and they just, they're not going to change their mind. So it's kind of like screaming at a deaf person. You're making no progress. And often there's people that we will have these arguments with that would rather die than embrace the argument coming from somebody who's so aggressive or mocking towards them from the start. And here's where I think volunteerism and humanitarianism can play a huge and necessary role in our movement. Volunteering to help others and humanitarian acts go a very long way towards softening hearts. Volunteering to help others can make a person who might, start off with kind of a negative opinion just soften enough that their mind can open up and you can start to actually have a productive conversation with them. And just kind of as an example, imagine if you walk up to a person on the street and you simply start off by saying, boy, I can't imagine how you could possibly believe that shirt looks good on you. Okay, you might be right, and they might even know that their shirt looks silly or something on them, but are they going to like you or anything? Or, right away you're kind of building a wall, and that's often what happens in this secular environment. So I'm going to suggest that maybe instead we should try and befriend these people, help them out. You get to engage with them some, and maybe at some point they quit looking at you as being the devil because you're helping them out, you're being friendly and everything, and then you can subtly suggest, hey, maybe you want to try a different shirt or something, and then it works. And in the end, they don't have that negative opinion of you or anything. You accomplish the result, but it's just in going about it in a different manner. So let's take one example of our organization doing a good deed. Humans Doing Good decided last fall that we wanted to go out and rake leaves with strangers with no strings attached. We picked an area where the leaves were plentiful and where the city was going to be picking up the leaves the next day, so it wasn't a big burden that we had to go and sack everything, etc. We then proceeded to ask people if they'd like to have their leaves raked. Some people were hesitant, some people refused to believe that there wouldn't be strings attached, and some people tried to give us donations, but in the end, by and large, people were happy. They had a lot of leaves raked, there was no strings attached, and people started to notice, these people in these yellow shirts that were doing this good deed. And they took notice of the name, Humans Doing Good. So as we were about to finish the day, we were alerted by a home that we stopped at that there was an elderly lady just a couple houses up, and that she could use our assistance because she was having breathing difficulties. She had COPD. So we went up the street and we knocked on this lady's door, and it was clear that she had once taken a lot of pride in raking her yard and caring for it. It was a beautiful yard, but she had just gotten sick, so she was no longer able to care for it. So as we went up to the door and kind of explained who we were, what we wanted to do for her, her first response was, oh, you're a godsend. And so I'm like, well, okay, rather interesting being humanist approaching this lady, being told we're a godsend. But that stuck with me. And what I kind of come to believe is that it's okay for a humanist to be viewed by a religious person as a, quote, godsend, because that's progress. I'm not that devil persona that went up to their door or anything. She welcomed us in, we got to help her out, we got to carry out good deeds for her, and whatever opinion she might have started with, by the time that she received our help and everything, got to engage with us as actual human beings, it was clear that being a godsend was a good thing. So the lesson I took away from that day was really that conversion isn't what doing good for the sake of goodness needs to be about. It's just having an honest intention to go out there and help people, which is what we did. But there's more. From that one event of going out and raking people's leaves, we ended up finding our current treasurer who found out about us because we had raked the yard of one of her friends. By chance, on our second time raking the yards, we ended up raking her yard too. So as we're out there in the community engaging with people, we're making new connections, we're gaining people that join on, and you can see this picture on the right. that appeared in the Daily Sentinel newspaper here, and so we're also getting publicity from doing things like this. We managed to change a lot of people's potentially negative opinions, and after it was all said and done, everyone had had a positive experience with non-religious people.
Let's show the snow this year.
There you go. Could you use it? I'd like to follow one more chain we've experienced that started with a simple goal to do good for the sake of good. We wanted to do something nice for people on Christmas and who were stuck working, and one of our members had made a bunch of handmade slippers and hats to give out. Even though it was Christmas and it had no personal relevance to many of us, as we do not, obviously most of us don't celebrate Christmas to any real extent, we realized that for a lot of these people, it did matter to them. And so if we could go and do a kind act for them on Christmas, we could benefit them, and we were just trying to be considerate of other people. So our goal was just to be considerate. We weren't trying to go out and convert them or anything. And our members did a lot of baking, and then we went and we distributed these baked goods across the valley. This included giving treats and slippers to the homeless. And as we were about to depart, after giving these slippers to the homeless lady, she went and this lady came and stopped us as we were about to depart and said, "Oh, these slippers are exactly like what my grandmother made me when I was a child." So we realized that we had a profound impact on this one lady who had stopped us and come up and engaged with us. And it was from that event that we decided that seeing the gratitude and helping homeless people and the impact that we had made us want to get a lot more involved with our own homeless community. So we had heard about some dog attacks that had recently taken place, and these dogs were belonging to members of our homeless community. So we wanted to find out some more information about our own homeless. We started by inviting the Grand Junction Police Department's homeless outreach team to speak to our organization along with an individual who is currently homeless, as we were trying to kind of get both sides of the story. We learned that there were actually quite a few services available for our local homeless population, and that food was readily available. Despite seeing all these homeless people with the signs and stuff, in our particular community, it seemed that there was actually food readily available to them if they were willing to go and get it. This was a bit of an eye-opener to most of us, who would assume that there just really wasn't food and it was a problem. As a small organization, we knew that we were not able to solve homelessness in our community, but we still wanted to help in any way that we thought we might be capable of. So we learned that there was this need for assistance for dogs belonging to the homeless individuals, and homeless individuals could receive petty tickets for things like dogs off of leashes. Even though it was a small fine, what would happen is if they couldn't pay it initially, that could spiral them into the court system, and then that fine would compile and compile and compile until eventually these people are getting arrested for something as simple as a dog off of a leash. So what we ended up doing is we went and did some fundraising to help homeless dogs, and we collected collars, leashes, all sorts of stuff like that to try and address some of these concerns. We ended up collecting about 1,000 pounds of dog food, a decent amount of money, many leashes, collars, like I said, and then we distributed these donations to places like our local Catholic Outreach, our homeless shelter, and to the Roycehurst Humane Society here, which is a no-kill animal shelter. We also had members individually bag this dog food so that we could distribute it on our own to people as we saw them with animals. We could just stop by and give them a bag of dog food and take care of that situation, at least for the day. And doing all of this gave us a lot of positive exposure, and what it also allowed us to do was reach out to a lot of these other organizations that we might not have otherwise done, which included like our local Catholic Outreach, which is who's shown in the right here receiving these donations. And then our contact from the homeless shelter led to another opportunity for our organization to offer assistance. We learned about an elderly woman who had recently become self-sufficient and who had transitioned, though, out of the homeless shelter. Her dog, Arrow, shown here, was suffering from abscessed teeth that were making it extremely difficult for the dog to eat. The elderly woman was kind of facing a scenario where she could either care for this dog medically and possibly relapse into the shelter, or she could choose to let the dog suffer and stay in her housing. So since we had some extra funds, we decided to go ahead and pay for the dog surgery, and we got this taken care of, and we got to reunite the dog, well, not reunite, we got to make sure that she could stay in stable housing, and that the dog was taken care of, and there was no more suffering. So it's things like this that, we may not be solving all the world's problems, but we did solve a world of problems for at least this one individual. And trust me, as people learn about our actions and our honest intent to do good, what ends up happening is hearts get softened. And our contact with the local homeless shelter also led to them requesting our involvement with the cleanup of a long-term homeless camp at the confluence of the Colorado and Junction rivers. A good deal of waste and debris had accumulated over the years, which included a lot of hazardous materials, needles, and things like batteries that were rotting in the river. Our organization, along with many other community organizations, came together to tackle a task that at first seemed kind of overwhelming and we thought was going to take multiple days to accomplish. We ended up getting it done in one day. We ended up filling 3 large roll-off dumpsters, and we got to do a lot of things like are shown here. This picture up in the top right here that you can see, that appeared in the Daily Signal, so we're just getting publicity from this as well. And we started gaining additional members who learned about this. From that, too, I was also interviewed 2 times by local radio or television stations, and this provided me a platform to get to discuss humanism in our own community that I wouldn't have otherwise had. We did not do one thing to try and recruit anyone or convert them in doing these good deeds, but we nonetheless gained additional members and positive exposure from simply starting with a rather simple act of kindness on the holidays and then following the ripples out from that point. We took positive action whenever we thought we could. We did not sit idle and wait for something to come along into our laps, and we didn't wait and sit idle and then try and aggressively attack something. We weren't just trying to react to things. We were looking for problems that we could pose solutions to. And we learned that one simple good deed can actually trickle out into almost a year's worth of doing good things. So I hope I made it kind of clear that there are numerous benefits possible to secular organizations that do good for the goodness sake. However, I'd like to make sure that I point out some of these benefits that seem to naturally flow from it. People and animals receive assistance, people have their hearts softened, people find it easier to open their minds and to listen to people that they view as friendly and helpful. Your network of opportunities expands tremendously, and the scary double persona that many of us seem to have by default becomes a real person who others get to know personally and can engage with. It's a good way to attract members, and it garners media interest and publicity, as I've said, and it can open the door to things like grants, because you're out there doing positive things in your community, and you're starting a network with these other nonprofit organizations. And it's important to remember that it all begins from one simple desire to do good for goodness sake, not because a God is telling you to do so, not because you think you might get some of the other results that I've kind of mentioned, but it's just from starting with a base to do something good and kind for your community or fellow man. It's also my belief that there are 2 sort of different but equally important branches of secular groups. There seems to be groups that focus on legislature, defending our liberties, upholding the Constitution, and taking a stand against religious aggressors. I think these types of organizations are critical to the success and the advancement of the secular movement, and without them we can quickly lose our liberties, we can quickly see the church in our state affairs, and we can quickly become muted in our own discourse. However, I think there's a growing need for secular groups to do work on the hearts of people. There's plenty of room to improve the image of non-religious/secular people, and there are plenty of people interested in helping others without being mandated by faith. And there is an increasing acceptance of the non-religious amongst our youth. As non-religious/secular people and groups, we cannot continue to allow ourselves to simply be outworked and out-organized by religious organizations. We need more secular and non-religious groups and people helping others out, improving our reputation, competing effectively, and I put competing in scare quotes because it's not necessarily a competition, but getting out there and doing good work in ways that don't necessarily always involve critical debate, or that at least open the doors to productive debate. While the secular and non-religious groups that are focused on things like legislature are busy protecting us and making headway in their areas of expertise, others of us need to be busy returning the favor by helping improve our reputation and actively showing everyone that we are indeed good people. We need to be doing good rather than talking good and otherwise being invisible, which is often what happens. We need to be creating welcoming communities and creating support structures that help some of those that are lost when people leave churches. I'm a bit uncertain as to whether or not secular and non-religious groups can effectively be both legislative warriors and watchdogs, while at the same time allocating enough time to do things like volunteer for local communities and become a respected community member. But I am certain, however, that at the very least we need to be supporting each other. I feel that there's absolutely a need and a vital role for groups like Humanists Doing Good to play, while at the same time we require other organizations like the Secular Coalition for America that was here earlier, the ACLU, who's here as well, and the United Coalition of Reason to fill. When one of our organizations may have a weakness, it's kind of the other side's strength, is what I've found. And we kind of need to be complementing one another. And they depend upon those kind of constitutional watchdogs and defenders and stuff. They kind of depend upon us improving our own image, getting out and engaging with our communities, and becoming more human. For instance, if we are able to get us to have more electable candidates and things, that increases their ability to get legislation passed and everything, which continues to kind of reciprocate everything. So, oops, I'll just pull it. There we go. So I just think it's important that we all get involved in our own communities and find ways, one group or another out there that you can probably get engaged with. For instance, if you're from Denver, there's definitely options available. If you're in our area, there's at least 2 groups that you can get involved with. Wherever you're at, try and get involved. Okay. Okay, so just to close this up, I just kind of want to ask if there's any questions about our organization or anything that we've done. I'm more than happy.
Thank you, this is brilliant. I support, I have a full supporting group I would like.
Okay.
This is something I would relate with. Not to,
sorry, what did you say?
Something I would relate with.
Okay,
you know, this kind of social services, you know. In South Africa, we have something similar project, you know, Ubuntu. It's the idea of being a human being in closer language, you know. When they say Ubuntu Kabantu, Moto Kebato Kebato, in closer language means a human being is a human being through other people.
Right.
No, doing good for the sake of itself, you know. I just have a little bit of philosophical, not serious philosophical question, you know. When you said to the woman, it's a beautiful story, the anecdote you gave, God sent. Because doing good, if I feel inspired by God to do good, does it undermine the quality of the goodness itself? Or it doesn't?
No, we have no qualms with religious people. I mean, people can have their own motivations for doing good. Our particular belief, and it's, you know, as much as a belief as a religious person, is that a God is not required for goodness. That's just our philosophy. So often you'll hear the term bandied about, good without God. And that's not, you know, a phrase that we typically use a lot in our particular organization, but it's definitely part of the American Humanist Association's kind of marketing, I would say.
Yeah, and I just want to assure you that not any Christian that thinks that humanism is obnoxious or evil is not a true Christian, because that is actually contradictory to the very tenet of Christianity. Why I say that is because I'm a Christian and I call myself a humanist.
Okay.
But I don't see it as contradictory. They are reconcilable. So, and what I wanted to ask first time was because I don't normally, my problem is when I come to a forum like this, it's always seen as if humanism is a kind of anti-Christianity, which is a wrong impressionism of humanism, because it is larger than that. If you talk about post-humanism now, we talk about post-humanism.
What I'm going to recommend is maybe we can have a dialogue.
All right, that's why, because
I just want to answer some more questions.
Yeah, when we talk about the dogs, I was so happy because you included other things other than human beings, which was very exciting for me.
You know what? That was a group effort. What it started with was an absolutely horrible logo that I started with. And I proposed that to our group, you know, and said, hey, what do you guys think about this? And what I tried to do is I took the AHA's logo and I made it bubbly. And because I wanted it to look more like a human. And I thought the AHA logo looked really sharp and stuff, like kind of pointed. So I tried to soften that. And through collective critique from our own group, this is what we emerged with. So, any other questions?
Great job.
Oh, thank you. All right, so we do have a couple of minutes. If you guys want some drinks or anything.
I got a question for you.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see it.
So, I'm not necessarily familiar with, okay, I can be loud enough. I'm not necessarily familiar with, like, some of the other groups around the country that have done similar things. Could you maybe talk about the history of, for lack of a better phrase, ideology around trying to help and, like, put ourselves out there?
Okay, well, yeah, there's a lot of organizations that are possible for you to maybe gain an interest in. You know, I'm going to try and limit this mostly to humanism in this particular context, but there is a national organization called the American Humanist Association that you might be interested in. One of the things that often happens with the non-religious people, and we've probably all experienced that are in this whole state, what often happens is that it's difficult to find volunteer opportunities that aren't either faith-based or that aren't so repetitive because they only have one particular narrow focus that time after time after time you're doing the same thing until you burn out. So what we try to do is get away from that burnout model of, you know, when it's secular, it's usually only one topic. So we try to go a little bit more into what I'd say is kind of a church model, you know, if you forgive me for that, but of looking out there and finding ways that we can engage with our community in a variety of different ways. Am I answering your question enough? I'm not really talking about national level, but...
I'm just kind of curious, like, where that came from.
Really, to be honest, our own group, and I'm only speaking for our own group, was Velvet and I, who's back here in the back corner. We decided that, you know, we kind of had enough of this, where we wanted to be able to volunteer and do good things, and we didn't want it to have a religious mandate. We didn't want to have to go into a church and say, okay, can I do this? We didn't want to see strings attached. We didn't want to see, you know, houses getting built or something for people, but then finding out that there was actually some motivations where they were kind of shady or something, where things had become so large that it was more a money-making endeavor despite being like a nonprofit status or something like that. So we tried to get away from all of that. And that's kind of the grassroots effort was how we started this. And then we looked for an organization that matched up with our beliefs. Mm-hmm.
I think he's looking for a specific example. A great example is what the Harvard humanists have combined with the Norway humanists and have a project right on the border between Haiti and Dominican Republic, where it's an incredibly poor area, so poor that literally what these people are, they're in slavery. They have no land and they work as indentured servants. And what happened, the rate of deaths on pregnancy, on giving birth, childhood births, was incredibly high. I think it was like 15%. And what happened was they didn't even have a clean place, any place without a dirt floor. So what they did, the Harvard students went down there, and along with the Norway students, they went down there and built a little shack. But it's got a wood floor, it's got a bed, it has clean water, boiling water. And since that time, in 2 years, there have been no deaths. And we were the first people when the Haiti earthquake took place. We were the first group in. Within 1 day, people flooded the calls at the American Humanist Association with calls, what could we do? We had $55,000. We just loaded stuff on a plane, got it down there, and because we already had the infrastructure in place, we were the first people, the only people to get supplies in there, into Haiti. Little known, right? But we did it. We were the first people there.
There's definitely other organizations, like the Richard Dawkins Foundation, for instance, helps in events of crisis and things like that. There's a whole bunch of organizations now that are stepping in. Even right now, like I believe it's the Freedom from Religion Foundation is working with the Light of the Night campaign to raise money for leukemia. If you look for kind of an issue, there's more and more, there's becoming secular groups that are getting involved to help out. So hopefully, but any more questions? Go ahead. Oh, thank you. Appreciate it. I was a nervous speaker, and I apologize for that, but hopefully the message still got across. So, all right. Thank you, guys.